I love shooting on vintage glass. I think it's wonderful. I have a pretty decent collection of old lenses, but I'm particularly fond of Pentax glass. Pentax glass is very consistent. It's made in Japan. Construction is solid. The little focus wheel is actually really, really sweet, and it's a wonderful experience shooting with these lenses. And they're all really, really high quality. You can usually find them for very cheap on eBay. But anyways, I shoot these on my Fuji X Pro 2, but realistically speaking, you can shoot it on any mirrorless camera or any DSLR camera. You just need to buy the adapter. Now, I always get this question like, which adapter am I using? Where can I buy it? Blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't really matter. You can buy any adapter. They're all around $8 online. I use the K&F concept, but the only reason I use it is because I found this guy on Craigslist here in Seoul, and he actually lives in a city next to mine, just like 1 hour, just like 1 hour away, right? So if I buy an adapter, it takes like a day to get here. So I don't have a brand allegiance. I just buy it because he lives the next city over, and they're usually around $10. But anyways, let's talk about my Pentax lens collection and why I like them. First off, we have the SMC Pentax 28mm 2.8. Now, back in the day, wide angle lenses were not the greatest, but actually this one is pretty decent. It's one of the lenses I like using every now and then. I didn't buy this lens. My girlfriend at the time, which is now my wife, used to shoot photography too, and she actually bought this lens, but she doesn't shoot anymore, so now it pretty much belongs to me. And I like using it every now and then. I have the Pentax Super ME or ME Super, and I usually keep it on that film camera because I like to play around with different cameras, So I have two of those actually. One of them was also gifted to me by a friend, and I keep them in really good condition. Japanese take really good care of their glass, So even though it's quite old, it's quite nice. You can find it on eBay from anywhere from $40 to $80. And if you find one like at a garage sale or something, I would suggest getting it unless it's in really terrible condition. I don't have a 35mm for Pentax. For some people, they either shoot 35 or 28, and I just happen to be one of those people that prefers 28 over 35. But I do know that Pentax has good 35mm glass, so if you're that kind of 35mm person, you should look into it. Now, my first film camera was the Pentax K1000, which is probably the same for many people watching this video. And it came with the SMC Pentax 51.4. Again, I have two of those lenses, but I really like the blue coating on it, and I really like the buttery smooth focus ring. It's a really nice lens. It's always been a pleasure to shoot with. But after some time, I wanted to research into what is Pentax's best glass, right? And one of them was the Super Takumar 50mm 1.4. Now, the thing about this lens is there are actually two variations. There's like an 8 element and a 7 element, but it's not that much of a difference from all the images I've seen. And my version is the 7 element Super Takumar 50mm 1.4. It actually has thorium in the rear elements. I know people think it's a coating. It's not. It's actually baked into the glass itself, but it's a radioactive lens for simplicity's sake. Now, if you don't know how radioactive lenses work, I just made a video about it. You can check it out. It really changes the light. It bends the light differently. It makes it quite beautiful. My only nick with it is that the bokeh is beautiful, right? But it's really, really hard to nail the focus, even with the focus peaking on my camera. So when I do get it, it's quite lovely. Anyways, even though it goes down to 1.4, I usually shoot it around f2, and it looks just as good to me, And it's one of the lenses I've had for the longest, and I love it very much. But some time ago, not that long actually, I bought the Super Takumar 50mm 1.8, also radioactive. Now this one only goes down to 1.8, but the difference between those two, the 51.4 and the 55 1.8, besides the being stopped down a little bit less, is it's actually much sharper wide open. So 55mm 1.8 currently is my favorite lens just for that reason. Yeah, and they're actually quite nice. I didn't go over the prices, but both the SMC Pentax 50mm 1.4 and the Super Takumar 1.4, they go for about the same price, the 4280. And if you don't mind the little radiation, which is actually quite negligible, I would go for the Super Takumar 1.4. Really, it's no big deal, nothing to worry about. But I'll make a video about those two lenses later, the 51.4 and the 55 1.8. Now it's funny because the 55mm 1.8 is actually kind of cheaper than the 51.4, even though I prefer the 55 1.8. Quite honestly, anytime I've gotten a Pentax lens, they've always really been like in super pristine condition, like no scratches or anything. They've just been re-oiled and clean. So these are wonderful lenses. Like, the Japanese really take care of them. I get most of my lenses from Japan because I live Korea, so it's like right next door. It doesn't take more than a week for the lens to get here. One thing you do have to consider about the 51.4 Super Takumar and the 55 Super Takumar is they do tend to yellow over time. This is because of the radiation. Now, there's a whole scientific reason why it turns yellow, but you can just leave them by the window for a few days and the yellow will clear right up. My next lens is actually the 135 3.5. It's actually a really beautiful portrait lens if you can hold your hand still. These lenses can actually be found really cheap on eBay. Like, almost all these lenses are really easy to find and they're really cheap. This one costs like $20 to $30, which is surprising given the quality, because the way these lenses are built and like the pictures you get out of them is just pure awesome. You know, it's like if you were like a poor photographer or just want to get started in photography, like, I would invest in some good vintage glass like the ones I'm telling you about right now, and you can actually build like a nice complete collection of all ranges, you know, with just not that much money. Anyways, the 135 3.5, great for portraits. I'm not the greatest portrait photographer, but I do like to use it from time to time. It's also pretty decent at macro, even though I'm not a macro photographer either. I got the Pentax 200mm f4 from a friend, and actually I find this one a little bit hard to use. You kind of need a really steady hand, unless you're shooting in the daytime, because you're going to be using like a high shutter speed. But it's a really beautiful lens, and the construction is really well made. I don't think my words do these lenses justice. That's why I'm going to make like more in-depth, not reviews the same way other YouTubers do them, but like, I just want to show you guys all kinds of pictures I get out of these lenses, because people are always shocked to hear that I take my photography with old vintage lenses. You know, like, I do have expensive autofocus glass, but I really only use those for like events or weddings or that kind of thing. But the rest of the time, when I'm out shooting about with friends or just enjoying myself, I prefer to use vintage glass, just because the way it feels and the satisfaction of using it. It's really hard to explain. You have to shoot these for yourself to understand. Finally, my last lens is too big to show here. Is actually the Pentax 500mm f4.5. Now, this lens is extremely difficult to use, even mounted on a tripod, but the reason I use it is mainly to get that very condensed look at the city. So it's surrounded by mountains, and even though it's 4.5, I don't shoot it at 4.5 because it's really hard. First of all, I usually shoot around f9 with this lens. That's not really a problem, because for me it's more of a landscape lens, which makes me think and give much more respect to like bird photographers back in the day for using this lens, being able to focus with this beast. It is quite heavy, and I've seen it go up to around $700 on eBay, but one day I saw it on eBay for $200, and I thought to myself, that's really cheap for a 500mm lens, and a 500mm prime for that matter. And so I just nabbed it right up straight from Japan, and 1 week later it was here. Now, I'm not going to tell you to go out there and get a 500mm f4.5, because I don't think most of you would ever use it. But for me, since I like shooting from the mountains and I like getting a lot of cityscapes on tripod, it's a great lens. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to be doing more in-depth reviews about these lenses, but not reviews the same way other YouTubers do them, just reviews my way. And most of these lenses are pretty cheap. You can get the 200mm from anywhere like 30 to 80 bucks. So most of this glass, you get them for less than $80. That's the great thing about old vintage lenses. And if you're just starting out, if you're just like a hobbyist, and you might want to look into getting old vintage glass, you know, because it's, first of all, it's cheaper, and these days everyone is using a mirrorless system, so they can easily focus with old manual lenses. You know, it's not really a problem. So I don't see the need to spend thousands of dollars more just for autofocus when I can just autofocus it myself, and it only takes me like a second or two. So anyways, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Meanwhile, do enjoy these lenses. They're wonderful, they're awesome. If you're using Fuji X or any other mirrorless camera, I highly recommend you look into vintage lenses. Doesn't have to be just mine. But yeah, see you around.